Dallas ISD Superintendent Dr. Michael Hinojosa, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. One thing that I asked you last week at your news conference about on the first day of school was what projections you have of the students who were quote unquote missing, who were not there. It's a week now. What can you tell us? How many students are missing, if you will?
Well, it's getting better, but it's not getting better fast enough. We budgeted for about 151,000 students. On our books means they've shown up at one time or another is over 140,000. But what we have actually enrolled in classrooms is on a daily basis 137,000. So we're still 13 to 14,000 short of what we were expecting. And so that is a number that is concerning to me. So, but it keeps getting better every day. And part of that is, the biggest chunk of that is pre-kindergarten students. In the past, we'd go door to door knocking. We can't do that right now. So that's about 4,000 of those students. 1,000 of those students are because of password issues. So we'll get to those. So there are a myriad of reasons. It's going to keep getting better, but it is even more than we were expecting. And even my conversations with other urban superintendents and suburban superintendents, our numbers are even bigger percentage-wise than what I'd seen with other districts.
What was your reaction when you saw this? I mean, it's been a week of this already.
Yeah, it couldn't be good. We do compare is day to day. After day one last year, day one this year, day two. And what I saw is that as more people were getting online, getting their devices, the numbers were improving. But we still have a long way to go. So luckily we have a reserve and we don't have to worry about our budgets. But we don't want to use all of our savings account, early on. So it is a concern. More important is the learning loss. These kids are already 3 weeks behind. And if they're already 3 weeks behind and they're not here learning, that's going to create some academic problems for us down the road. So that's probably the biggest concern that I've had.
And I want to ask you about that. But first, let me get back to, the why. What is your best guess? You mentioned 4,000 pre-K. But I'm also wondering, how much of this is a technology issue where students don't have the devices, or even if they do, they can't connect? And how much of this is an issue of maybe parents moved and didn't bother to update the district? They decided to homeschool and not, tell the district. So where are you on that?
It's a combination of all the above. But let me tell you this, we've also looked at this by campus types. We're almost at 100% for our magnet schools and our choice schools. But for some of our struggling schools, some of our ACE campuses, those schools are in the red zone. And so to your question, part of that is parents with agency that have the willingness, they're there. It's just the ones that, may be testing the system, or they've made another decision to go to a different campus. They got into a charter school or a homeschool. Those are the ones that we're further behind on. So, and of course, then you add the pre-K numbers, which is probably a third of them. And then that kind of stacks up the deck about where these students are.
I remember last week you had mentioned that there were sixth graders who, they didn't receive the technology, the devices last year because the district wasn't doing that in the elementary grades. This year you are. But so how many of those youngsters, those sixth graders, are we talking about? And are they part of these numbers here? And then in the week or so, how many have you been able to get them devices?
Yeah, is probably the easiest problem to resolve because we know who those students were and we got them. So those sixth graders, many of those sixth graders we've gotten to already, and that's probably where we gained our enrollment because they're assigned to a campus, they're assigned to a teacher, they probably have a sibling, and so we got those resolved quickly. The pre-K is the more complicated one, and the password is the more complicated one. So that unforced error was easier to overcome because we know who those students were, and we've gotten many of those. I would say we've gotten over 80% of those students with their devices. So that's not the biggest worry that we have. It's the other students, especially the ones in struggling schools.
And what's your best guess about those then, these other students in these struggling schools? What seems to be the issue? And I know you mentioned before you could just go door to door before. So what?
I think it's also a variety of reasons. Some of them, they haven't been successful in school. So what's going to motivate them to come in right now if they haven't had success in the past? And that's why we had all the additional resources on our ACE campuses to give them support. So they're probably not as motivated as some of our other students. So we have to, our teachers and our principals have to create that motivation and that inspiration. So I think that's a big part of it. And some of them are just, quite honestly, just testing our systems to see how soon we're going to be. And many of them do much better with in-person instruction. Everything is virtual right now. And so I think once we get in-person instruction going, I think we'll see those numbers tick back up, and we'll be able to identify those more readily once we're in person. But we're still about 3 to 4 weeks away, 3 weeks away from that right now. Even though we are going to bring in our 6th graders and our 9th graders a week early. That's our latest plan, to start getting them to kick the tires on their new campus. I think that'll help that problem as well.
You mentioned before about the struggle educationally for these students. And how concerned are you about the fact that, you know, they are on virtual, and even the elementary school students who are on virtual, you know, it's not the same. Everything that I've heard from every educator.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about that because we haven't seen these students since March. Some of them did a lot in the spring. Some of them didn't do a lot. So they're already falling further behind. That's precisely why we're testing all of our students. We've already tested 10,000 students this week on what we call our MAP test. That's the beginning of the year assessment as to where they are. The last data we had was the middle of last year. So now we have data, and now we know which ones are further behind. So now we can go back and start catching them up. We're going to be testing students for the next 3 weeks, so that by the end of the month, we know we would have tested every student to find out how far behind they've fallen so that we can catch them back up.
And based on the students that you've tested so far, what percentage of them are behind?
We don't have that data as an aggregate and as a total group. The teacher has theirs, the ones that are their students that they're testing, and they're testing 4 or 5 at a time. So, and we've started with the ones that we suspected we had more challenges with because we had fewer contacts, they were out the longest. We don't have overall data. The teachers have data, and they're working on those. We'll have overall data when we finish all the students testing at the end of the month.
Okay, and let me ask you, you're bringing the youngsters back. Has there been any political pressure for you to delay that?
No, actually, there was some pressure early on when the numbers were bad, but that's kind of dissipated, especially when the county went to orange. People said, okay, let's start investigating how we can bring people back. People got to go back to work. So I think if anything, it's gone the other way. In fact, Jack, we did the last survey we had, 45% of our parents wanted in-person instruction. That has now moved up to 55%. So as things are getting better, more parents are wanting to come back to a campus. So we'll just keep monitoring that data, but there's been no pressure one way or the other to do anything for political reasons. It's how do we do it practically and do it well.
And you mentioned 55% of the parents now want their students back in person. And so I know that the district has really been urging parents to submit their surveys. Is that 55% the number of surveys you've gotten so far, or does this not include the surveys on what, you know what I mean? Because I guess these surveys are a definitive answer, right?
Great question. We've gone from 20% response rate on the surveys to 50% response on the surveys. And we've gone from 44% in person to 55% in person. So of the ones that have answered, and half of them have answered, over half of them, 55% of them want in-person instruction.
So, and when are these surveys due?
Well, we wanted them last week, but that's not practical. Yeah. So we'll take them whenever they get them, but we wanted them by last Friday, and they're coming in. And so anybody now we're having calls. Our principals and teachers are calling them. Okay, we sent out an all call, you didn't do it. Now we need for you to tell us so that we can plan. For example, there are several schools there's going to be If you're more than 60% of the parents that want to come at a school, then we have to maybe have a hybrid, because we have to have social distancing. We have to keep them separated. So right now we only have one school in the whole district where we're concerned about being too close together. But that's because they have extra room, they have large gym, they have a large cafeteria. So those things, we need to have that information. But right now, out of our 222 schools, we only have one that could possibly go into a hybrid situation where they wouldn't be coming every day. And we don't want that. We want them to come to school 5 days a week. And so we're trying to figure out how we overcome that.
And are you willing to reveal that one school campus?
Not yet, not yet.
Okay. And so let me ask you, is the district, I know September is usually a campaign, I guess, to get students to attend school. Is that still the case where the district is working on a campaign to get students to obviously attend virtually this year? And how is that going?
Well, typically that campaign is in August, and we actually go door to door for our pre-K kids. And last year we did great. We had a kindergarten roundup. We increased our numbers in pre-K. This year we can't. We can't go to door. We can't go knock on the door. So we're still doing it virtually. We're doing it with push-outs, with social media. But it's a lot different than going to a door and knocking where you know there's a family. And these are families, it's their first time to come to Dallas ISD. So it is much more difficult to execute. We still have all the effort, but we can't use the traditional means of that recruiting. And we're a month behind because we started school 3 weeks late.
Dallas ISD Superintendent Dr. Michael Hinojosa, we really appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jack. Appreciate it.
Stay healthy.
Yes, sir.